Today we're going to explore a very interesting topic on BizToday. And as you know, we're only going to look at those particular business trends or business ideas that really have you talking or thinking. Maybe you don't have enough access to information or knowledge, but remember that in this particular conversation, we'll be giving you access to all those types of information and where you can go and find them. The month of July is dedicated to funding. So today I'm very pleased to have in studio Jonathan Darker. He's an innovation executive and has a serious passion for connecting inventors with investors. His latest projects include the running of digital days throughout South Africa. The third Durban Digital Day takes place on 4th November 2015, followed by events in Pretoria and Cape Town. So please make sure you take a note of that and get your tickets. It's a great event. Jonathan is also the founder of the Venture Hub, a business accelerator consultancy service and venture capital conduit, as well as the MD of J. Darker Consultancy, an innovation management and alternate income generation consultancy company. He also makes time in his diary to be a member of the South African Innovation Network and currently writes for News 24 Voices, so go check it out. Jonathan Darker, welcome to the studio.
Thank you very much.
It's lovely to have you on the show today. I know we're talking about a very interesting topic that's being talked about every day at the banks, among entrepreneurs, around the coffee table, and that's funding.
Yes.
But particularly around venture capital, which I know you've had quite a bit of experience and interest in the past couple of years.
That's right.
And we often have conversations about, people refer to it commonly as VC. It's not a weird new fad name for some kind of selfie taking, but VC is something, right? So we're going to talk about that today, but what is VC? What is venture capital?
Venture capital is funding that's made available usually by an individual, a wealthy individual who has surplus income, but it can also be made available by various institutions or organizations. And the point of the funding is to take businesses to the next level.
So the point of funding is to take businesses to the next level.
Correct.
Just in a simple, basic form.
Correct.
That's the understanding
Yes.
of it. Is it so? Let's explore that a bit further. Where does this funding come from?
The funding can come from numerous sources, but generally it comes from wealthy individuals who will decide to put money into an up-and-coming business to try and get something else going that ultimately would earn the venture capitalist a return on their investment.
Okay, these are interesting keywords or buzzwords in the
Yes.
VC industry. But before we go on to understand even more of that, how would you describe the VC environment or culture in South Africa?
It's very unique. If you look in Europe, there's a lot of large firms that concentrate on providing venture capital, but in South Africa it seems to be more under the radar. The other thing that happens in South Africa is the fact that a lot of individuals are venture capitalists in their own way, and this might be by a friend helping someone start up their business, grow their business by helping them financially for a period of time. In essence, that would mean that person is a venture capitalist at that stage. So it's not necessarily only really wealthy people or large corporates that can offer venture capital, but it can be people that we know personally.
So you're commonly referring to, you read these entrepreneurial or business books written specifically for South African businesses.
Yes.
And a term they often refer to is friends, family, or fools who will lend you the money, right?
Correct.
So in that particular instance, the first VC that could ever come into your life is from one of those categories.
Most definitely, and it's usually the easiest to achieve as well.
And sometimes maybe not payable in some instances.
Often that is the case, but with every venture capital investment, there's always a risk and return. And when a venture capitalist does invest, they're aware of the risks and they decide to make the investment anyway.
Jonathan, what are some of the myths associated with VC, especially in this environment and this country?
Well, in this country, I think the first myth is that they're hard to come by. That's not the case. There are many opportunities and funding opportunities in this country available to entrepreneurs today. The second myth, I think, is that it's only, people have this idea that it's only people like Richard Branson or really a top wealthy individual that would do that. And it's not the case. Generally, it's anyone who has surplus cash available that could be a venture capitalist.
So surplus cash, I want to understand this a bit more thoroughly.
Let me give you an example. If you earn a salary and after you've paid all of your bills at the end of the month, you have a little bit of money left over.
Right.
you would be then in the position to take some of your money, and firstly you could either save it, or you could invest it, or you could take a chance with one of your friends or somebody that you know and help them start their business. People will say, but I only have a small amount of money left at the end of the month. What difference is that going to make?
Right.
But when it's a startup business, if somebody was to say to that startup, I'm prepared to cover your internet cost for the month, every month for a period of a year to help you get on your feet, that can be the difference between that specific business succeeding and failing. And people sometimes ignore that fact, but it could be an opportunity, that it's an investment that could be made that could be beneficial to both, even though it's small.
Yeah, so this is great. I like that you've sort of highlighted the very basic form of VC,
Yes.
of venture capital, which is literally somebody having extra cash and saying to a business to be, I can help you cover these costs for a certain period.
Yes.
But real venture capital then is people who have access to large or massive amounts of cash.
Correct.
And obviously opting to invest in an idea, a concept, a business plan that shows the potential for return on investment.
Correct.
Now, with VC, how is this working alongside other initiatives in the country, like government grants, funding, and those kind of things? If you can just explain that.
It's important to understand the difference. There are phenomenal and brilliant grant opportunities and funds in place in South Africa for startups, but they generally tend to concentrate on seed businesses. In other words, businesses that are right in the beginning stages. Okay. Venture capitalists generally concentrate on businesses that have already been around for a little while and have actually proved that they are viable. That's the first difference there. The second thing is the fact that most of those grants are exactly that. They're a grant. They don't necessarily need to be paid back, or the, interest, or but earnings on it is not necessarily necessary.
Okay.
But with a venture capitalist, he or she will want a return on their investment. So the chances of achieving venture capital are, I would say, slimmer, simply because the criteria is stricter than what it would be with a grant. A basic grant would be easier to achieve because there are no expectations of the money being paid back, where a venture capitalist would want to have their returns.
I'd like to talk about this a bit more. I mean, it seems like the ability for you to secure venture capital versus a government grant is equally as difficult as each other.
Correct.
But just to stay on that particular idea, I picked up from you, you mentioned one of the criteria that a VC would look for before investing in a business is to see the amount of time that they've been in business and the success of that.
Correct.
So what are the other criteria that a VC looks for before selecting a business for investment?
I think that obviously changes from individual investor.
Right.
But I think the most important is
sure. Criteria.
I think the most important thing that they look for is actually they have a look at the entrepreneur themselves.
Yes.
There's a tendency for them to back the jockey and not the horse. So they really need to bond with the entrepreneur and actually understand what they're trying to achieve and believe in it. I think that's the first thing. The second thing they look at then is the business case. Having a look at how strong is the case. Is it a proven case? Does it have a track record? And what's the opportunity for growth? And I think that's very important as well.
Yes.
The scalability of the business. That's definitely something that's taken into consideration. And then I think the last reason, or the last point that's taken into consideration, is the intellectual property. In other words, is it something that's totally unique? Is the intellectual property that's been developed that makes this business opportunity unique being properly protected?
Right.
And in what kind of guarantees would they have around that? I think that's quite important.
So let's just go through those again. It's the entrepreneur themselves.
Correct.
It's the business case.
Correct.
And the last one would be
the intellectual property.
Intellectual property, which I know is another conversation all on its own.
Correct, yes.
Especially the protection of that
Yes.
is just something that in South Africa I think people have a bit of difficulty being
Most
able to navigate that process. But what's interesting to me also is you're wanting to access that funding, and there are spaces for you to do that.
Yes.
There are numerous funding fairs, there are funding portals, that you can access either online or offline or through various institutions, like CEDA may be one of them.
Correct.
And you'd obviously be able to give us a bit of insight into other South African initiatives that allow you to apply for funding.
Yes.
But what do you think it is that entrepreneurs get wrong in the pitching process? Because a lot of them come back and say, well...
Naz, I've seen it many times where a pitch has been unsuccessful for the simplest of reasons. And I think it comes down to probably a few highlights, ones that I can highlight right now. The first is ambiguity. Business case not being straightforward, doesn't make sense, and the entrepreneur hasn't got a clear vision.
Right.
The second would be that the entrepreneur overvaluates their business. So they will say to the venture capitalist, I want an astronomical amount of money for a very small share of equity in a business that hasn't even yet showed a profit. I think that does upset a lot of venture capitalists. The next thing that I think happens quite a lot is that the financial figures don't work out. Somewhere along the line there are simple mathematical calculations that aren't done right, and that immediately makes the investor feel nervous. And I think those are really the main reasons for that, and then just shabby business plans that haven't been well thought out.
And isn't that it? I mean, presentation is key.
Exactly.
It's all in the presentation and the detail. You know, a question that's come to me is the kind of cases that you see on shows like Dragon's Den and Shark Tank. Is that a realistic expectation or representation of what it's like to pitch to a potential investor?
Not at all. I find that to be very dramatized and over the top. Generally, venture capitalists are just other people. They just want to have a conversation. They're looking for an opportunity to make money as well as what the entrepreneur is, and they're actually there for a common goal, and that is to achieve. So it's not like that at all. A lot of times I've seen pitching sessions happen where the entrepreneur actually gets their entire business case redone for them and sort of said to them, try that, it will probably work if you do that. And that's valuable feedback. Even though they weren't successful in achieving funding, they got a lot more out of the deal than what they would have thought in the first place. The other thing that I think happens in South Africa quite a bit is that it's never a 5-minute pitching session. It usually starts off with meet and greet, a general coffee, and from there they'll start looking into the business case and the financials. But the whole time the venture capitalist is having a look at the individual and trying to understand the person, because that's the most important criteria for investing.
And the potential for success.
Correct. The drive, the business understanding, morals, understanding of difficult concepts, things like that are being assessed the whole time. And I think that's what the venture capitalist does, and the entrepreneur doesn't always realize it's happening. And that's right the way from the first emails that get pinged between the two, right the way to the simple coffee meeting. And what I've also often seen is a venture capitalist will ask the entrepreneur about an opinion on something totally different, wanting to understand their reason.
Their psyche and their thinking.
Correct.
Thank you for laying our fears, because I think a lot of people watch these shows in absolute fascination and would love to be there, but don't, are so scared off by the fact that it could be real.
In my opinion, that's just TV. It's entertainment.
I suppose it's entertainment at the end of the day.
Yes.
And so let's come back to real life maybe, and just think now about VC and an entrepreneur. I'm an entrepreneur. I have a business. It's at a certain stage in its life. At which stage is this business going to approach a VC for funding?
Well, generally before you run out of cash.
Yes, before you fail,
correct.
Before the 5-year mark.
Yes, but what happens a lot of times is entrepreneurs leave it too late, and at that point they're in a really difficult stage, and at that point it's too late.
Yes.
I would say as soon as you can prove concept, you can show that there's a good churn rate on income. At that point, if you want to take your business to the next level and you've got a clear direction for how you're going to achieve that,
right,
and how your plan is solid, then start looking out for it.
So at that point, you do believe that the business could be something much more scalable.
Yes, as soon as you realize it's scalable, that's when you want to go for venture capital.
So venture capital, be scalable. What else should we remember? I'd like to put this in a sort of a point form.
Well, make sure it's scalable. Make sure your business case is solid.
Right.
Make sure that you've already developed a sort of a track record where you can show and prove that what you want to do actually works, and show the venture capitalist how you're going to create this at a much larger scale.
Okay, so let's take one step back. The VC is giving you money for your business because they believe in the potential of the business to scale.
Correct.
What are they getting in return?
Well, when your business scales, their equity becomes worth considerably more.
So they're when you sign on with them, when that arrangement is made, they're taking a portion of your business, so they own a portion of the business.
There can be many ways to do that. Sometimes it can be in the form of a straightforward loan. Other times it may be that they come on board as a partner, where they would have an equity stake as well. That's the most common way of doing it, where they would come in for whatever the equity stake may be, that's determined according to various factors,
yes,
and the value determined according to various factors. And so when your business grows, their equity stake grows as well, and that's where they will make their money. On the upside there, the entrepreneur is making more money too.
But this is then the question for many entrepreneurs. Is it better for me to give away equity in my business, therefore some control? I don't own the entire pie anymore, I own a portion of the pie. Or is it better to take a straightforward loan? You go to the bank, you go to some kind of lending institution that will give you that money. You're obviously signed on to certain terms, repayment terms associated with an interest rate, and you're paying back far more. But I feel with a VC, you're getting not just the capital funding, but also as kind of mentorship behind that. Is that correct to say?
Most of the time you would. I don't personally know of any venture capitalist who's going to put money into a business and just leave it alone. They all tend to want to be available and actually have input into it. The upside to that is the fact that most of the venture capitalists are very successful businessmen in their own right. So you firstly have access to that network, and secondly you have access to a mentor, yes. So most definitely from that point of view it adds more value than a bank, but there are drawbacks as well, where sometimes a bank is an easier route to go, but it depends at what stage your business is at.
But this is, I think, a vital question for us in South Africa, where entrepreneurs face the daily struggle of accessing finance, especially as startups.
Yes.
And small entities growing in the SME market. I mean, it's very difficult to go to a bank. In the past, you could go to a bank and say you want a loan for R1 million, for example, and you could possibly go to them with 100,000 rand, and they'd be able to back you up with 900,000 rand. These days, you've got to show much more skin in the game,
yes,
and possibly go in with half of that amount for them to be truly convinced that they could come in with the other half. Why is it so difficult?
Well, I can't speak for why the banks are making it so difficult, but what I can say is it's generally created a large space for venture capital in South Africa, and it's why venture capitalism in South Africa as a whole has taken off, because the criteria that they evaluate a business on is drastically different to that of a bank. A bank looks at simple balance sheets and things like that and make their decision based on that. A venture capitalist looks at the person, the concept, the track record, the potential, and what the other secret thing that they look at is what value can they bring to the equation that's going to make sure that it's an actual success. A lot of times I've seen it where a venture capitalist invests because he knows that his contacts will be able to take the specific business to the next level, and the entrepreneur doesn't even know that yet, and all of a sudden the business is accelerated at an alarming rate, which is absolutely wonderful, and that's something that a bank will never be able to offer.
Jonathan, we've talked at length about VC. What would be your final top tips or guidelines for viewers who are considering this possibility, who understand that their business is at a certain point where it needs that added injection of cash so that it could go to the next level? What would be just some of the top things that you could advise?
I think I'm going to concentrate on one specific point right now, is when you're pitching for venture capital, make sure that your commercialization plan is solid. Make sure that you've given adequate budget to allocation to marketing. You know, a lot of times entrepreneurs spend all their time and money and effort in building their product, in working on their solution, and they have a phenomenal offering, but nobody knows about it. So making sure that you have sufficient planning to take the product to market is probably the most important thing you can do. And it's one of the things that venture capitalists will most definitely look at, because if they can't believe that you're going to be able to take the product to market with the plan that you've presented to them, they're not going to back you.
Jonathan Darker, our venture capital expert in the studio today, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Naz.
It was wonderful to have you in the studio, and I'm hoping we can talk more about venture capital in upcoming shows.
Most definitely.
That was Jonathan Darker from JD Consultancy talking to us about VC. And VC is not only for very cold, which is normally the case and now that it's winter in South Africa, but also for venture capital, something that you can think about to take your business to the next level. Please join us again next week for Biz Today, when we take you through the life or history of another successful entrepreneur. We talk more about funding, and we give you another roundup of the latest events happening. Thank you for joining us. I am Nazreen Ibrahim. Goodbye.